So welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. This is actually my 50th podcast today that I'm recording. And my guest today is Candice Malcolm. So Candice is the editor-in-chief and founder of True North. So Candice, welcome to the show.
Great. It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm really excited to chat with you today. And Candice, before we get started, just wanted to ask you, how did True North get started?
It was an interesting question because this is sort of like, it's a startup. And I think with any startup, the thing that you plan it to be is not always what it ends up being. There's so many stories of big Silicon Valley success stories that, started out as a pizza delivery company and ended up being like Airbnb, right? Like it's one of those progressions. So, True North, originally I started the organization back in 2016. And my idea was that I wanted to do more research and more reporting on immigration. I was a columnist with the Toronto Sun at the time. And that was sort of the beat that I was working on. I was writing a lot about immigration. And I observed that there just really wasn't a lot of research and interesting reports coming on immigration. It was such an important issue, such a popular issue at the time. It was something that was really top of mind for so many Canadians. So I created this organization. I sort of found a bunch of people with sort of like conservative immigration backgrounds that also felt like there was this niche and this need. So we started doing that, and we started. It was a nonprofit organization funded by donors. And what I kept hearing from the donors, the sort of small dollar supporters, people giving $20, $50, was that the thing that they really liked the most about what True North was doing was my investigative reporting. They were like, the long white papers on immigration, we can take and leave those. But what we really like is when you break news stories, when you're in the media, when you're putting stuff out in the newspaper, talking about it on the radio and on TV. That's what and I kept hearing that from so many people that eventually we kind of pivoted and focused entirely just on investigative reporting on immigration. And then it's like, there's just so many other issues that are important and interesting. And when you're a journalist and you're out there on social media putting out all these reports, what ends up happening is you get flooded with information, with tips, with people pointing to different things. And there's like 100 different strings that you can pull at. And it's almost a challenge as a reporter, like which one do I follow? Which one do I go? And you have like a lot of leads, and most of them don't take you anywhere. Some of them take you to like big places. And so over the last 3 years, we've exclusively focused on reporting. And there's just so much of a need, right? In 2017, the Trudeau government announced a bailout to the newspaper companies, making a huge conflict of interest, right? Like they sort of become de facto public broadcasters when they're being funded by the government. And there's a lot of trust issues, particularly for conservatives who are already skeptical of government, skeptical of liberals, skeptical of the media. And I think that this funding thing really just created this huge demand for independent media. We've seen a huge rise in independent outlets like True North, but there's a dozen others that didn't exist 5 years ago. And now I think since the Trudeau announced that media bailout, more and more people are recognizing the need for independent voices, journalists that are not beholden to a big corporation or the government, and that can just go out there and not have conflicts, just go out and report and see things as you see it, without thinking about, what is my corporate boss going to say? Am I being woke enough? Is this going to embarrass Trudeau enough that could potentially lead to us losing funding? None of those conflicts exist with True North. And I think that's why we're seeing such growth and such sort of positive feedback from Canadians.
Well, I gotta say, I'm a little bit embarrassed about myself because I didn't actually know that law was passed in 2017, Candice. So I'm totally was not aware until you just said it, that a lot of that the newspapers received bailouts, which obviously is a huge conflict of interest, because
Exactly.
now they need to basically support the government, because obviously if they're writing things that are not in support of the government, then they know that they're not going to be bailed out again. So again, like, this is complete news to me. It's a shock. Again, I'm totally embarrassed that I didn't know this information. So thank you so much for bringing that to light. But that seems like it would drastically change the way that people would report in the media. And like you said, I mean, there's been so many people that have been censored and have been silenced, and now like Substacks are just blowing up. I got a few subscriptions to a few different Substacks, and we're very, very lucky to have, independent journalists like yourself writing, because, if they weren't, we'd basically just only have this source from newspapers that were, bailed out by the government. So, I think that, like what you just said, it's incredibly important that we do have more and more people come out writing independently, who are not tied to the government and are not going to be putting out biased information.
Exactly. And honestly, Michael, I hear from so many reporters who are friends who work for these big legacy media companies, and they'll sometimes like privately text me or message me on Twitter saying that they appreciate our reports and saying like, one day we should sit down for a drink or coffee or something. And I can tell you all the times that I've had a story idea killed by an editor, by someone senior, because it crosses some kind of line. And we're seeing it in the US happen more with like the woke cultural attitude. I know Barry Weiss is one of the people that has gone to Substack and kind of curated her own little newspaper there, because she publishes other people's op-eds. And basically she was at the New York Times. She is not a conservative by any means. She's a liberal, but she was just so tired of the hectoring and the sort of woke attitude and inserting race into every single story that she ended up leaving. So that's also happening in Canada. And then you add on top of that this ridiculous conflict of interest. And I think that a lot of journalists on principle would recognize that there is a problem with journalists taking money from the federal government when your job is to hold them accountable, right? Like how can you possibly hold a government to account when you're reliant? This conflict has always existed with the CBC. Back in 2015, when Justin Trudeau was first elected, the Stephen Harper government was talking about scaling back the CBC, and they kind of hadn't increased the spending with inflation. So it sort of is like de facto, they call it a cut, but really it was just like they maintained spending. And both Trudeau and at the time Tom Mulcair pledged more money to the CBC. And I was like, how is this not a bribe? How, if you're a CBC reporter, knowing that one of these guys is going to massively extend your department and allow you to have 50 more journalists in your newsroom and produce much more content and make more money and have more responsibility, how could you, as a journalist, cover that fairly compared to the other guy who's saying, no, you're not going to grow anymore, or you might have to head towards having, an independent, privately funded business model? Like, such a conflict. And in the last two elections, we've just seen that expand to everybody. So I think it's a huge problem for the state of journalism in Canada. God bless Spotify, God bless Substack, and even True North. We built our own platform. We publish op-eds from a lot of different people, and we need to maintain these independent voices in the face of all these pressures. I haven't even talked about big tech censorship. Tech decides that you must have these opinions, and if you don't comply by them, we'll give your account strikes, or we'll demonetize, or we'll remove your page. We've seen that happen on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. Like, there's so many challenges out there when it comes to information. And I'm just grateful that there are still a few opportunities for people to hear the truth, hear real conversations, not be filtered, not have those intermediaries that have conflicts of interest, or they have their own agenda, or they're just not being honest about who they are and what they believe.
Yeah, and I think that people are kind of, sick of hearing from, legacy media these stories that are, completely biased. And I mean, the proof is in the pudding. If you look at a lot of the ratings, a lot of people, I think, were shocked when, I don't know, it was a month ago or so, it came out, like how popular, say, Joe Rogan's podcast was compared to CNN, and it was over 13 times more popular, right? So like, it's not even close. And obviously that's why, they're trying to censor him right now, is because, they know that way more people are listening to him than to CNN and to other media outlets. And then, so, for yourself, Candice, like, I think that you guys have grown pretty rapidly recently. I think that people are starting to, become aware that, CBC and a lot of these, legacy media outlets, are funded by the government, and, do have, very, very biased reporting. And because of that, that's probably why organizations like yourself are growing so quickly and so rapidly. And, I only see your organization growing, exponentially in the future. And part of that too is because the legacy media just refuses to change, and they need to change. So, they're really shooting themselves in their own foot. I think that if they came out and sort of said, we've had some, even if they just disclose their interest, people may even see that as some type of like honesty. But right now, I think people are more distrustful in legacy media than ever, and so that's why I see organizations like yourself becoming more and more popular, exponentially, in the next few coming years.
Well, I appreciate this. That's nice of you to say, and I hope so too. But it's almost counterintuitive, Michael, because it's like you think CNN is almost designed for like short attention spans. They typically create like almost like a sports like environment, right? When you're watching politics, it doesn't feel like you're watching politics. It
Yeah.
feels like you're watching a Saturday night fight or a football game or something like that. So they've created this entire sort of illusion of like what the news is like in order to drive fear and drive excitement and yet that model, the very ultra scripted, short sound bites, it's being beat out by 3-hour conversations that meander and they don't have any sort of logical correlation. Like it's just a conversation that you might have with like your friends on a Saturday evening over dinner or at a bar or something like that. And it's just such an interesting change that we've seen, that people would rather have an unfiltered, honest conversation than these like super short sound bites that have been designed, for short attention spans. So I think that there's a lot of positivity that you can focus on. And with True North, I mean, it's been incredible. I know we just saw the Conservative Party leader get ousted, and the Conservative Party is in trouble. They had the worst fundraising quarter in the history of the party. And even if you go beyond the other Conservative parties, based on inflation, that people aren't as excited about donating money to them. Well, True North's funding model is that we run on donations. We run entirely by the support of the people who view, and we just ask them to give us $10 a month or $20 a month. There's no paywalls, there's no subscriptions. It's all just donations. And we doubled how much we raised last year from the year before. We're growing really, really fast. We have a lot of people who really believe in us and support us. And it feels great. We're growing, we're hiring new people, we're able to cover more parts of the country, more topics. We have like great people on board, young journalists. We have a lot of interns that we're sort of training the next generation of independent-minded reporters. And, unfortunately, I'm seeing on the flip side, my colleagues in the legacy media, despite the bailouts from Trudeau, despite having all of these unequal advantages and like an unlevel playing field, they're still shedding reporters. The CBC is still laying off people from its newsroom. So I think that model is dying. It's dying.
Is dying. Is that right? Like they are shrinking in size overall, Candice?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's one hand another, right? Like their revenues are declining sharply. The viewership has completely collapsed over the last 30 years. Like it used to, it's crazy how many people used to watch the National. Like I don't have the numbers on top of my head. I can look them up for you, but it's something like 60% of Canadians used to watch the National. Now it's like less than 10%. Like people just, I heard Jordan Peterson once say, if you're under the age of 30, the legacy media doesn't even exist. Like it's not like it's dying, it's dead, and they don't even know what it is, right? Like they get all their news from social media. And I think we're really starting to see that play out, that the model that they have, which is based on subscriptions and paying and having all of these sort of like traditional distribution, like newspapers and airways and radio, like people just aren't as interested. They like the new technology. They like to be able to get their news from their phone, and a lot of like organic growth and sharing. I notice so much that if I look at social media and I look at some of the biggest legacy media news sites and reporters in the country, they don't have anywhere near the engagement that True North has. Like when True North posts a video, we get like thousands of comments and hundreds of shares, and everyone's liking it, and it's kind of takes on a life of its own, right? We have a lot of viral videos also that'll have like several million views, and you look at our competitors that are way bigger than us in terms of their budget, and their Facebook reaches like half of ours or less, and their Twitter followers, who might have like 2 million Twitter followers, but they put out a tweet and they get like 4 retweets, right? And like our stuff is getting like thousands. So it's really interesting just to see the engagement. Yeah, like we actually have like an army of people who are like part of True North Nation. Like they really believe in what we're doing, and they like it, and they want to share it with their friends because it's meaningful to them. Whereas what the media is putting out, the legacy media, is like, no, it's not not engaging with them. I don't know who their audience is. Like they're just putting it out. It's being read by bureaucrats and politicians, and like I don't know if it goes much further than that. I know there's every now and then there's an interesting article that makes the rounds, and people a lot of times with CBC, it's like there's a popular article because it's so ridiculous and so outrageous, and the comments are being like flooded with people being like, what is wrong with the CBC? Why would they put this out? There's one example that came out in December about words that the CBC would like erase from the English language. I don't know if you saw that, but it was pretty
No, I
amusing.
didn't.
It was
I
like,
didn't see it.
it's like these words
What
are
were some of the
problematic.
words?
I mean, it was exactly what you would expect. Like the term grandfathered in was somehow like ageism and sexist, and like it was just the like anything. Like you shouldn't say whitewashed because it's racist, and oh, you shouldn't say spooky around Halloween because the term spooks has like negative racial connotations, even though that's not the origin of the word spooky. It was like it was just like that. It was so Orwellian, like this idea that there's this woke vanguard and they're telling you which words are problematic. And if you say them, you're racist, even if you don't even mean the intent that they are putting onto the word that isn't built into the intent of the word. If you use it, it's because you're ignorant and because you're promoting systemic white supremacy or
Yeah,
whatever they
I
say.
think
It's just like,
a lot of the woke crowd, I think a lot of them are really just confused and need attention, and they're just kind of like, chat with like emotion. They never really say anything meaningful that, that you can see that, oh, they put a lot of, thought into what they're putting out. And a lot of the times they just don't have any statistics to like back up what they're saying. And like, the example that I can think of now, so I strongly support the police. I always have, way before the truckers convoy, way before Black Lives Matter, way before any of that stuff. Like the police are so important. Like it's so insane to think that people want to like defund the police. To me, like obviously there's going to be, some police officers who use too much aggression at some times, and that's awful. We do need to train those officers to use less aggression and just use only the force that's necessary. But overall, I mean, it's insane. Like, can you imagine a world with no police? Like that's crazy. Like that would just be absolutely mayhem if there was just like no police tomorrow. And these people, they're risking their lives like every day. Like I have several good friends who are police officers, and I mean, anytime they pull someone over and get out of their car, like you never know what that person could be holding in their own car. I mean, they could have a gun on them, they could just shoot them. And so I think it's un-Canadian, and it's just morally wrong to denounce these police officers and say that we should be paying them less. And I think that a lot of people on Twitter who are hashtagging defunding the police, they have no idea what they're saying. They're just completely naive, and they're just looking for attention. And I can't believe that that's become a trend right now. That's how confused the masses are, is that they actually believe that we would be better without the police, which to me is completely insane.
right. But then at the same time, look at how quickly the same exact people who are calling for defunding the police are sitting on Twitter right now, calling for the police to come remove the truckers, calling for the military to be brought in to remove the truckers. Like
Yeah.
there's so much hypocrisy and so much irony just because obviously we need police, right? And even the point that some of them were making at the time that, oh, we should just have more social workers who are trained to deal with people who are in like high stress situations. It's like, could you imagine someone who is mentally ill and perhaps holding a weapon, and the first person you want to send in is a social worker? That person will get killed. Like
Yeah.
there are so many stories in Europe of almost the exact scenario: a social worker being killed by a deranged refugee or a deranged criminal. It's like sending in some poor young social worker to try to deal with someone in that situation. They are not prepared. And I'm not saying there's no role for social workers and people with that kind of background, but probably not on the front line. Probably not when someone has literally called the police because there's a high risk, high stress situation where someone's life is in danger, someone's very vulnerable. The police, perhaps police need to be better trained. I'm not suggesting that, but it's like the sort of like simplistic, naive, utopian suggestions that like, let's just have more like everyone can just hold hands in kumbaya. It's like, no, I've spent time and I've seen people having psychotic episodes on the streets of, like, the Lower East Side in Vancouver or downtown Toronto, and maybe they have a knife, maybe they have a gun. You don't want to find out, and sending in a social worker is not going to solve that problem. And even suggesting it is sort of insulting. But the same thing. I mean, we saw, and this kind of speaks to the corporate attitude. Like, even the National Post, which is supposed to be the conservative newspaper in the country, they had a headline saying, "Let's defund the police," and the whole thing was kind of discussing it from, I guess, more like a libertarian angle, that we spend too much on policing and that we have this. But there's so few voices willing to stand up and say, let's just rewind and, like, imagine what the society would look like without police. Like, think about the individuals, the men and women who put their life on the line every day to defend order in our country, and just dismissing them because of some bad guy that was in a different country dealing with a totally different situation. To me, that whole, like, importing that culture of, like, anti-police, or it just felt wrong. And I was really disappointed that there weren't more people sort of just defending the good police officers of this country and not trying to conflate them with an American problem. It's almost a uniquely American problem.
Yeah, like and again, like one point that you made is, like, I do think we need to train, police officers, better, both, in like arm to arm combat. Like, there was Andrew Wang said that, he thinks that every police officer should be a purple belt, and that might be a little bit of a in jiu-jitsu, that might be a little bit of an overstatement. I don't think he knows how difficult it is to get a purple belt in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
I do it. It's very, very difficult. That takes years and years and a lot of dedication. But at the same time, I do think that they could be, better trained, and, in that discipline in particular, you can sort of restrain someone without causing any type of harm whatsoever, because you're not striking the individual. And then also, again, maybe we do need to train police officers, in addition to having combat training and the regular training that they already have. Maybe there should be some other focus, like a social worker, that where they get that type of training as well, and they have kind of both. And I think that would be ideal. And so in that situation, what would we have to do? We would have to increase police funding to train them better. And I think that is a better answer overall, instead of decreasing police funding. And my friend Rav Aurora, has his own Substack, and he's been on here a couple times. He's been on Jordan Peterson's podcast too. He's a very good journalist. He wrote about how in Minneapolis, when they defunded the police, the homicide rates rose considerably. I think it was 34% or so, and it was their highest homicide rate, second highest homicide rate in the country ever. So, I do think that, we do need to, potentially look at the situation. We're not saying that it's perfect, but it sort of seems like it's very illogical to just say that we need to defund the police. I think if you really look at it and you deconstruct it, the actual answer would be to get better trained police officers, which would require increasing overall police funding.
Yeah, and I've seen the research that you're talking about from Ravi's a young guy reporting,
Yeah.
but I mean, the dystopia is playing out. Like, there's been a huge resurgence in crime that we haven't seen since, like, the 80s or 90s in the US, in these inner cities, and there's a lot of things compounding. They've changed a lot of the rules, where if you get arrested, you no longer have to be held. You get released until your hearing date. We've seen district attorneys in a lot of the major blue cities just refusing to prosecute even dangerous criminals who have been looting. I mean, look what's happening in San Francisco, where there are just mass lootings happening at department stores, where, like, 80 guys just go in and take whatever they want, and they're just totally unafraid, because they know that there's no one enforcing the laws and everyone's afraid. It's like, this is the direction you're taking your country. And it's not just the defunding the police, even though that's a major part of it. COVID played a major part of it as well, because so many of these people aren't in school. They don't have anything to do all day, and they're not going to log on and do Zoom school. They don't have any parents around. They probably don't even have a computer. Like, the sort of disproportionate impact of lockdowns on sort of underprivileged people is wild. And we're seeing that play out at the same time. And then also when it comes to police, I mean, I'm really concerned and interested in training the next generation of young reporters and young journalists and giving them opportunities and giving them skills and those kind of things. And I'm sure you feel that way about the medical community as well. But it's like, who would want to go and be a cop right now? Like, your job is
Exactly.
incredibly dangerous to begin with. It's basically thankless. You have all of the elites in society saying that you're institutionally racist. You have every single person you interact with potentially could have a phone that could be recording your interaction in an unsavory way, like missing context. Like, I can't imagine being 18 years old and saying, you know what career I really want to pursue, law enforcement, because it's like it's thankless. It's thankless. And what's that going to look like when the people who, you know, might be like someone like you're talking about, a jiu-jitsu purple belt or a star athlete or someone who has this really decent commitment to their community and the kind of person that would have been drawn towards law enforcement, someone who's physically fit and cares a lot about leadership and community. It's like, do you think those guys are going to want to go and be police right now? I doubt it. I bet they're looking for some other career path. And so the people who you're going to be left recruiting are not going to be the same caliber. And that's going to be a whole world of problems down the road in the future. That's something else that we should consider before we, you know, publish headlines saying defund the police and run political campaigns and have all these leftist city councilors out there. Like, it's just there's so many elements of it, Michael, that are just so bad for society, and we're watching it happen. It's like, someone needs to stand up for this, because this is not going to end well for anyone.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you as a police officer, what you want is you want like very, very dangerous guys who have it under voluntary control, right? Because, you know, a criminal is dangerous. So what's going to beat a criminal? A good guy who's dangerous. And, you know, that's what a lot of people don't understand. You know, they think that we need to like soften everyone up, and like that's only going to make things worse. You know, if everyone that we hire as a cop is super soft and comes from, you know, and again, I'm not saying that there's no place for social workers by any means at all. We probably need actually even more social workers than ever before. But in terms of police officers, like you need to have, you know, guys who are very, very, you know, dangerous, so to speak. And that's how, you know, you beat dangerous criminals, is with a dangerous guy who has it under voluntary control. And, you know, that's just like not the messaging that we're giving out to kind of young youth. And to your point, you know, of course, like people aren't going to want to become a cop because they're not going to be able to feel that they're going to be able to do their job, and they're just going to, you know, be discriminated against, be called racist. They're not going to receive any praise or thanks, and you know that's going to be very, very dangerous. You know, so we need to, you know, encourage people to become, you know, police officers, and we need to make it so that when they do become a police officer, they have the support of not only the police department but of the community and the citizens of Canada. And right now, you know, there seems to be this huge divide, and you know that's why I've kind of spoken out a little bit against this, you know, defund the police movement. And part of the reason why I brought it up today was because I'm not sure if you saw last night, Candice, and yesterday there was, you know, a lot of doctors who were, you know, tweeting out about the Toronto police, because they had said something about their uniforms, which was taken out of context. And so a lot of doctors online kind of went online and said, you know, we're tweeting at the Toronto police and saying that they, you know, didn't feel safe going to work, or that they were being discriminated against or something like that. And the Toronto police immediately replied to all these. Everyone can look at this on Twitter. He immediately replied to, you know, most of the doctors who are making these comments and said that, you know, what you guys are saying is completely taken out of context, and we're doing everything that we can to make sure that you guys, you know, get to work safely. So, you know, I think that messaging again, you know, needs to be put out there a lot more, and we need to, you know, again, support our police officers who do protect us every day. But on that note, Candice, I kind of want to talk a little bit too about the truckers convoy, which is going on right now. So just first question, where have you been to? Or no, sorry, you haven't been to Ottawa, correct?
No, we've had a sort of rotation of different journalists from True North who are more easily travelable right now. I have two small children, so I don't do the traveling on the road, on location stuff as much as I would have, say, like 5 years ago. But yeah, we have my producers there right now, and actually it's interesting because my producer, so we had Andrew Lawton and 3 other journalists there last weekend. My producers are all week, and he asked me this morning if he could stay for the weekend because there's supposed to be another big protest and perhaps a counter protest. And so just before I jumped on this Zoom call, we were trying to book him a hotel, and apparently there's some issue. Ezra
Yeah.
Levant tweeted about it, that the federal government was like booking up all the extra hotel rooms, and there's just like no hotel rooms left in the city, and they're told the hotels not to rent extra rooms. So like my producer's like, just, hey, can I just stay an extra 2 nights? And they're like, sorry, we're full. It's like, I don't think you're full. I think you're just like not letting people in. So I haven't verified that. I have no idea if it's a rumor or if it's just the fact that the hotels are so full because so many people are in fact coming in. But yeah, it's quite a lots of shenanigans going on at those protests in Ottawa. So it's good to have someone
I
there to
think
keep
it
an eye
is
on it.
true though, Candice. I mean, again, like I'd have to look. I mean, I'm just kind of looking it up now as we speak in real time. But that's what I saw though too, was that there were some people online that were saying, like, they posted it to their Instagram or their Twitter, saying that they no longer have a room. One guy was staying at the Homewood Suites, I think it was. And all of a sudden he just got this, I'm just trying to find it now, saying that he that he can no longer stay there, which is insane. So I think like the hotel was already booked. I'm just going to read it. Actually, it says,
Sure,
this is
yeah.
from Homewood Suites. It says, dear guests, with the current situation demonstration in the downtown core, many streets are closed, preventing both customers and team members from accessing the hotel. In view of this exceptional situation, it is our deepest regrets that we are forced to cancel your reservation with no cancellation fee for the upcoming weekend. And then it goes on a little bit further. But I mean, that's just not letting people book. That's canceling people who have already been booked. And again, I'm kind of taking his word for it, but he posted on his Instagram, Homewood Suite. So it looks like it is in fact true that they are canceling people who have booked these hotels. And I wonder too, this guy I'm talking about is pretty vocal on his Instagram about about COVID in general, if they're almost like targeting people, because it's very, very easy to find out who someone is these days. All you have to do is just put them in Google and you find out most things about them, for most people anyway, not everyone, but for most people. So it's very, very interesting and also disheartening and disappointing that Ottawa is doing that. Like, they're not allowing Canadians to even go to Ottawa to protests, which is unconstitutional and morally wrong and corrupt.
It's so interesting, isn't it? That one of the things that stood up to me during this whole thing is that the sort of elitism is coming from people in Ottawa. Look, I lived in Ottawa. I worked there. I know exactly who the people are. I know who lives there. I lived in an apartment building. Like almost everyone who lives in Ottawa works for the federal government in some way, shape, or form. They're either a politician, they're a political staffer, they're a bureaucrat, they're a diplomat, they work for some kind of a quango or like a quasi government related industry. Almost everyone, also journalists who are sort of at this point quasi-government as well. I would say within Centertown and the market, it's like 90% are those people. And there's a lot of workers that work in the mall, they work at restaurants, bars, and stuff. Most of those people commute from the suburbs because it's cheaper out there and better if you're not like in the bubble of political stuff. So watching these people have their sort of temper tantrums and breakdowns on Twitter, calling this an invasion and an occupation, it just shows the like complete elitism that they have, the disdain that they have towards working people, the attitude that they have that Ottawa belongs to them, that you're not allowed to go to the parliament. It's their parliament. You're not allowed to be here. Leave. Like to me, it's so striking. I see it in so many tweets and so many messages from, and I'm sad to say it isn't just the Liberals, right? It's also the NDP, who were once the party of the working man. It's also the Conservatives. I saw a very high profile former cabinet minister from the Harper government say that it's despicable to see Conservatives at this rally, and saying that anyone who equates Trudeau with tyranny should go look at what's happening in Russia. It's like, it's such a false equivalency on that particular one, because it's like, if you just like ignored everything that happened the last 2 years, like rewind to like 2019, and if I were to describe the situation that's going on today, I think almost everyone would describe it as tyranny. almost everyone, just based on what the government is doing, how they're dividing people, what they're allowing, what they're not allowing. Even the story, again, I haven't verified it, but it seems true based on the experience of my producer, what you just read, what I saw, the few tweets I saw before I jumped on this call. Can you imagine a federal government that is so vindictive and so opposed to people exercising their basic democratic rights to peacefully protest and to exercise freedom of assembly and freedom of speech that are all guaranteed in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, a very charter that Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, drafted and implemented? They're so desperate to circumvent and prevent those rights from being exercised that they're willing to put a blanket ban or start buying up rooms or whatever it is that may be happening. Like that's the kind of stuff that you imagine happening in like dystopian science fiction novels, or like, like crazy communist Latin American governments, not in Canada. Like it's so disheartening. It gets so much elitism and so much like the sort of confidence of the expert class, the elites, that we're just going to make all decisions for the people. We don't want to see the people. We don't want to hear from them. We like, go away, shut up, get in your trucks, get back to work. And like, we're going to play like every dirty playbook, every trick of the dirty playbook, to discredit you, smear you, like delegitimize you, further alienate you. And we just want you out. Like it's
And they've
so
done
bad.
it very, very systematically. Like there was this clip of Jordan Peterson. I remember this is like 5 years ago, and he said, like, if I'm going to, try to, I'm not sure the word he used, basically like manipulate you kind of thing, in a word like, I'm going to do a little bit, then I'm going to stop. I'm going to do a little bit, and then I'm going to stop. And then, so right now, like, canceling hotel rooms, and again, it's canceling. It's not just allowing someone to book. Like if you said that to someone 2 years ago, you would think, absolutely not. That is batshit insane. Like that will never happen. Like if I book a hotel room in Ottawa, someone's not going to say to me that I can't go there because of, a certain demonstration. But because, we have followed all the rules, and because we've complied so much over these last 2 years, they've just, inched everything a little bit and a little bit further. And then now people are blind to this fact. Like people think, oh, they canceled some hotel rooms in Ottawa. That's kind of status quo. That's kind of normal. But in reality, it's not normal at all. And those people have basically just been conditioned to believe everything that the government says, and to believe that the mainstream narrative. Whereas, if they just made this giant leap at first, I think people would have actually stood up and maybe said something, or hopefully anyway. But because they've done it so systematically, they've just like broken us down little by little by little. And now they're, almost at a point where, they completely control everything. And we're not even allowed to book hotel rooms in the nation's capital anymore.
Well, exactly. It's about your expectations, right? Like, okay, I'll just give you a couple examples from the past 72 hours or past week, say. Okay, so we heard that the Nova Scotia government was banning protests, that you are not allowed.
Glad you brought that up.
You're not allowed to stand on the side of the road in Nova Scotia and wave a Canadian flag. That's against the law in Nova Scotia, right? You're not allowed to make a private donation to a GoFundMe page that supports the truckers in Nova Scotia. That's illegal. Okay, if anyone was hearing that, I mean, like for us, it was like when that happened, I was like, yeah, I've heard Nova Scotia has been doing crazy stuff throughout the pandemic. I have a friend that lives there, and she's constantly sending me the crazy stuff. I was conditioned that it didn't surprise me. I was on a newscast that evening with a Great Britain news, so a London broadcaster. He was asking me that question like he could not believe it. Right, it was so insane to him that could happen in a country like Canada that he asked me to explain it like twice, because it was like so shocking to him, right? Or take Trudeau, right? The truckers are coming, everyone's excited, they're going to have some accountability, they're going to have a protest, and all of a sudden Justin Trudeau is exposed to COVID and he gets swept off to some secret location, and some media story says that there's a threat against his life. Did that surprise you at all? Because it didn't surprise me.
No,
I was like, yeah,
surprise me whatsoever.
Justin Trudeau has no interest in accountability. There was no way he's going to meet with these truckers. He's already predicting violence. He's already saying that he's concerned about violence. No, I had a lot of American friends that were like, they were focusing on, I know Tucker Carlson did a whole like segment on his show, like, where is Trudeau? Why isn't he being accountable? This huge groundswell of support. But to us Canadians, we're like, of course he's not going to be there. He has no interest in talking to people whom he disagrees with. And so, there are all these things. Or how about the Quebec government introducing a vaccine tax. If you're not vaccinated, you get an extra tax, which thankfully they abandoned. But the idea of that we're going to tax citizens differently based on their health choices, you know, that's
And it
crazy.
was never
That's
even
crazy.
a plan. Like, so I
Yeah.
had David Fight on the show fairly recently. He's one of the candidates of the PPC party. If
Yeah,
you're
he's
nodding,
great.
so it
Yeah.
seems like you know
No,
who
I
he
had him
is.
on a couple of weeks ago as well.
Oh,
Yeah,
did
he's
you?
awesome. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I asked him about that. I was like, so what exactly is this tax? And he's like, nobody knows. Like, it's just complete bullshit. It's just something that, you know, that Francois like put out there just that people would, you know, get scared basically and get vaccinated. But there was no like actual plan as to how they were going to implement that vax tax. And, you know,
That's wild though.
thankfully now
it's an
it's
intimidation
gone.
tactic, basically.
Yeah,
It's
that's
an open
exactly what it
intimidation
is.
tactic. And
Yeah.
like all of this stuff, right? The Trudeau government was hinting towards mandatory vaccines, like forced vaccines, not a passport, not a mandate that you lose your job. Like, no, like they're talking about forced vaccines. They've been hinting at that, and there was an article in the CBC about it. But it's like any of these things just taken on their own, or perhaps if you talk to one of your friends that are outside of Canada that haven't been conditioned on this crazy path that we've been heading on for the past 2 years, they are like outraged and they think it's wild and they think it's like a huge affront on freedom and democracy. And it's like, Canadians need to wake up to that. Like, talk to a friend that doesn't live in this country, tell them about any of these things, and see their reaction, gauge their reaction. Because I know that a lot of people who are watching some of the stuff in Australia, like watching police officers just talk about an overuse of force, like beating the crap out of somebody because they don't have a mask on. Like, how many crazy videos have you seen like that coming out of Melbourne or other Australian cities, right? And when we see that, we're like,
Yeah.
what is wrong? And then I have some Australian friends that are kind of like, no, that's an over exaggeration. It's not as bad here. And it's like, no, you're being conditioned, right? Like, you're being conditioned to accept that as normal, and it's not normal. There is nothing normal about that scene. And I don't care, you know, who's filming it and whether they're a muckraker and whether you totally disagree with them. Like, that doesn't matter. What I see with my eyes is a police officer like scouring the street and arresting people who don't have masks on, even though they're outside and they're not near anybody. And it's like,
And police don't want to do that. Like, I didn't mean to interrupt the cast,
yeah.
but like I have a ton of, you know, cop friends, and like they don't want to arrest people for not wearing a mask. Like, cops want to catch criminals, and like, you know, not wearing a mask, you know, is not gonna, like, it doesn't make you a criminal. And like I'm someone who like wears masks when I go out in public, you know, and you know, even though, you know, the science on that is pretty dodgy overall, and I'm not, you know, I really don't believe that children should be forced to wear masks. But, you know, cops in general, you know, maybe not, I can't speak for every single one, but they want to catch criminals, they want to catch bad guys doing bad stuff. And, you know, if everyone is who is, you know, not wearing a mask is a criminal, I mean, that's going to occupy all of their time, and then the real criminals are actually going to go get away with something. So, you know, I think that it's really going to backfire overall in several different ways. I mean, one is just the fact that people aren't going to, you know, trust the police because, you know, they're trying to arrest people for not wearing masks, which is, you know, kind of crazy. And then the other thing is that it is going to allow other criminals to flourish because they're going to be so occupied, you know, with having to deal with people not wearing masks.
I agree with that. I think that, I mean, we've seen a huge surge in crime in the US. I'm not sure what the statistics are like in Canada. I haven't looked at them recently. I will just say that I think in Australia, they're dealing with like a different kind of psychosis, because some of the clips that I've seen, it's like, man, these guys are like taking out their aggression. Like, I feel it's generally speaking, Michael, that our society is wound up pretty tight right now. And a lot of people have a lot of pent up anger and aggression. And we see it coming out online. We see like really, really intense vitriol. I have a friend, Travis Smith, who's a professor, and he wrote a beautiful essay about how Canada is becoming not Canada. Like the whole, all of the things that we sort of classify ourselves as is like being kind and nice and polite and friendly and community oriented. You know, we're seeing a lot of tribalism, a lot of anger. And I don't want to just say it was online. I was in Hudson Bay a few weeks ago, and I saw a woman just basically have a temper tantrum. I had a store clerk that was helping me look for something. Apparently we got too close to this woman. She didn't like it. She started screaming at us. And she was like an older middle-aged woman who just like she ended up calling the manager on us because I was frustrated with her too. I was like, don't yell at her. Don't yell at the store clerk. Like, if you don't want to be here, if you're afraid about COVID, go home. Don't come out in public and then yell at, for me, I have very little tolerance for people who are privileged yelling at people who, or just treating people poorly in the service industry. Like, I don't like it when you talk down to somebody who doesn't have the same opportunities or doesn't have the same education, doesn't have the same background. The woman who was helping me at the Hudson Bay was an immigrant to Canada. And I hate that, right? So I'm going to stand up for them. That's like my instinct. And then this lady ended up getting the manager, and then the manager came and spoke to me and was like, well, she has an autoimmune disorder and she's really worried about COVID. I'm like, then don't come out in public and don't have a temper tantrum in the store. Like, I've heard other stories like that of people just being really wound up tight. And I think that a lot of that is spilling out. You can see a little bit of it in the protests. I don't know, you saw, there was a clip that went viral of some cyclists in Ottawa just screaming at the truckers, like, go home, F you, F this, F that. Like, I haven't slept in 5 effing days. You can see that this guy's having like a nervous breakdown. It's sad, but it's kind of funny too, because he's like, again, this attitude, like, Ottawa belongs to me, it doesn't belong to you, get out. And everyone's like, this guy's obviously a bureaucrat or a Liberal staffer or something like that. But I think people are wound up pretty tight, and there's a lot of pent up frustration on both sides. And I think that as our community gets like more fragmented, more split, more tribalistic, there's like so much hatred of the left versus the right, and like all the stuff, you can see how it's like really sort of splitting people up, and it's kind of like a scary moment if you look at it in that way.
Yeah, and interesting too how you brought up, the left versus right, because I know that you tweeted out something today that Andrew Lawton and I discussed yesterday, but you had the I'm sure Andrew did too, but you had the actual stats on your Twitter, and that was indicating that the second most represented party at the truckers convoy was the Green Party. And again, this is where like the right and left gets very, very blurry, because the PPC party, the People's Party of Canada, is considered to be the most right-winged party in Canada per se right now, versus say the Green Party, traditionally is probably considered to be the most left-wing party in Canada per se. Maybe not, you're kind of shaking your head. So
well, I think the Liberals are the most left-wing party right now, but that's just my but yeah, no, right. I get your point. The Green Party, the Greens in a lot of other countries are almost like more centrist because they're free market, and they believe it's too bad that the Greens in Canada are so crazy and fringe, because they have an opportunity to perhaps fill a void. But I hear your point about that
yeah, like it's tons of different Canadians from diverse backgrounds, diverse ethnicities that are all coming together, and with different political views, and the media again is making it out like it's this like white supremacist thing, which is completely insane. I mean, I've seen so many people at the protests of different ethnicities that are also fed up with Trudeau as well. It's like, it's not like it's just like one group of Canadians that are being affected by Justin Trudeau and the government. It's all Canadians. So obviously, like very obviously, you're going to have a diverse group of people there, because all Canadians are being affected by this. And yet still in the legacy media, and I don't think people are buying it as much this time around, hopefully, they're still saying that it's more or less like this like white supremacy thing. And then the other thing too, I know we only have a few minutes left, is that they're not all headlines, but some headlines have been calling it like this anti-vax thing. And it's not an anti-vax thing as much as an anti-mandate protest. It's more of like a freedom and mandate protest. No one's there is saying that like, the vaccine is, I mean, I'm sure there's some people, but like very few people that are saying like the vaccine is bullshit and it's like anti-vax and all that kind of stuff. It's more of an anti-mandate protest. And, again, like that messaging is not being, conveyed by the legacy media.
Yeah, well, look, it's the same thing, right? It's when someone tries to explain the origins of the protest, they're like, okay, Trudeau flip-flopped and he ended up deciding to implement this cross-border vaccine mandate, which means that we're going to lose 10 to 20% of a workforce that's already understaffed, and we already have huge problems with the supply chain. I mean, it's happening all over the world, but particularly in Canada, where we rely on truckers so much to get goods to market, right? That was the origin of it, was being opposed to this mandate. But over the week of last week, when we saw the protests grow, when we saw people lining the overpasses and lining the highways, and we saw the Canadian Maple Leaf, and we saw this story getting international pickup, like in a way that most Canadian news stories never get. But these truckers inspired the world. There are now trucking convoys happening on every continent. Like this is a huge watershed moment in Canada. The world is paying attention. I think that's why so many international observers were so shocked that Trudeau would leave, because they're like, this is huge. And your guy is leaving town, and now he's calling them a racist. Like it was such a cop out on Trudeau's behalf. And again, for people who aren't used to him and his immature behavior, it was really quite shocking to us Canadians. We're like, yeah, par for the course. But the movement that I saw was about a couple of things, and it didn't really have anything to do with vaccines. It hardly had anything to do with mandates. It was about Canadian pride, Canadian unity, and Canadian freedom. That's what I saw. I saw people saying, we want our country back. We don't want these controls anymore. We want freedom. We want Canada to feel like Canada again. And it could be a multitude of reasons. Perhaps part of it is that community thing that I was talking about, the absence, people not being able to leave their house, people not being able to engage in community, in sports, and the things that typically unite us and make us feel happy about our country. We don't have those. They've been taken away. Your ability to go to church, your ability to visit your extended family, your ability to enjoy sports and friends and neighborhood barbecues, your kids playing sports. Like that's such a staple of the community. And the fact that that's all been suspended, I mean, it just there's this void. And what I saw was these amazing people coming together, and the community element, people bringing food, people offering supplies, the Canadian unity, flags everywhere. There was 10,000 flags. There was 10,000 flags on Parliament Hill. Canadian flags, right?
I didn't know that number.
There was one Nazi flag, one, and that was what and as True North reported, the guy was there for all of maybe 3 minutes, took off. We have pictures of him. We have a reward for anyone who can give us information. We want to know who he is, because unlike the legacy media who just say, oh, Nazi, you guys are all Nazis. It's like, no, that guy was not part of the protest. If he had actually walked through the protest, he probably would have gotten his ass kicked. And pardon my language, I don't usually swear, but my guess is people would have told him to get the hell out of there, because people do not have tolerance for that flag. That is a vile flag. It is the antithesis of what we believe in this country. It has nothing to do with that protest. But the fact that a couple people snapped a shot of this guy walking across the Chateau Laurier, which was not at the protest, it was above the protest, or across the canal from the protest. That was their gotcha moment, and that was what they used to discredit the entire movement. It was such a disgrace and such an insult to Canadians that the media went down that path, that Justin Trudeau went down that path. And unfortunately, too many Canadians believe that, have this sort of naivety, and they don't question what they hear on the CBC. That's an unfortunate part about it. I don't think it's the majority of Canadians that do that, but there's too many that do. And shame on them. Every time the legacy media do this, Michael, and I know we're running short on time, but let's finish this point. True North has been growing. True North is doing really, really well. Every time something like this happens, all they're doing is bringing more people over to us, because anybody who was at the rally, anybody who was related to the rally, I'm talking about the thousands and thousands of people who supported the rally along the way, that went to their overpass, that cheered these people on. All of those people, every single one of them, saw how the media slurred them and maligned them and tried to paint them in the worst possible light. Those people will never trust the media again. They won't. And I'm sure many of them previously did. So the media, they do this with some frequency. It happens, I would say, every week, every month. I do a segment at True North called Fake News Friday, where I just go through the worst examples of this kind of stuff happening. It does happens every day, but every once in a while, it happens on such a large scale that you can't help but pay attention. And all you end up doing is driving more people away from the legacy media. So if there's a silver lining about the despicable way that they behaved, and the way that they basically just did the dirty work for the Liberals and Justin Trudeau by saying, well, Trudeau doesn't like these people. He doesn't want to meet with them. It's inconvenient for him. What can we do? Oh, okay, we'll just paint them all as Nazis. And the legacy media were happy to go along with that, happy to do that. They did that. And I don't think it was successful. To them, it was successful. And they're doubling down on that right now. Like, get these extremists out of Ottawa, get these Nazis out of Ottawa. All they're really doing is alienating more Canadians who just can't, they can't, that doesn't make any sense. It can't possibly be. And they're just never going to trust the media again. So
yeah, I think they're again, like I said at the beginning of the show, but they are shooting themselves in the foot. They know that their ratings are going down, and just by doubling down and not changing in any way and not evolving, the ratings are going to go down even further, which again is going to help True North flourish, which I'm all for. So again, if there is one silver lining in this, it's that the legacy media is shooting themselves in the foot, and they're going to have less and less viewers overall, and there's going to be a massive increase in viewership in media outlets like True North. So again, that's at least one positive from it. So yeah, unfortunately, Candice, we are out of time there today. But can you just tell everyone where they can find you online, a little bit more about True North, and we'll kind of wrap things up.
Sure, absolutely. So our website is TNC, like TrueNorthCanada.com, or .ca, but .com, TNC.com. And you can find us on all the social media platforms. We post on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. I know that there's a lot of people out there that are encouraging us to move to more of the alternative ones. So we're also on Rumble, Super U. I think we still have a Parler account. We're experimenting more and more with those alternative ones, but tnc.news. And I think I said tnc.ca before. No, it's tnc.news. And I'm Candice Malcolm. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I try to stay fairly active on those platforms. However, I will say, as a mother with kids, I try not to spend I don't spend as much time on social media as I did a few years ago, because a lot of times it's not very productive and it just leaves you frustrated. And I would much rather focus on my journalism, get that done, so I can go spend time with my kids, as opposed to waste the day away on social media. But regardless, you can find me, Candice Malcolm, and again, it's True North, TNC.news.
Okay, well, Candice, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you today, and thank you for everything that you and True North are doing.
All right, great. It's so great to chat with you and get to know you a little bit better. And thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Thanks again, Candice.